Hello, good evening, everyone. And it's really, really lovely to have you join us this evening for a Kidscape live Q&A for parents and carers in Anti-Bullying Week. My name is Bryony and I'm the Communications Manager here at Kidscape. And if you haven't heard of Kidscape, it's the National Bullying Prevention Charity. And what we do is we provide help and support for children and families who are impacted by bullying. And I'm really delighted to be joined here this evening by a panel of experts who are here to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, anything burning that you'd like to ask, if you just head to our Facebook page, or if you're watching it from there already, just pop the question in the comments and I'm told it will come through, pop up, and I'll be kind of juggling the two and asking your questions to the panel. So to introduce the panel, we are joined this evening by Liat Hughes, who is a parenting journalist and broadcaster, and she's the author of 5 parenting books. We've got Lauren Seager-Smith, who is the CEO of Kidscape, and Lauren has worked in bullying prevention for over 12 years, and she's also the trustee of Children England. We've got Joe Plumb, who is a multi-award-winning public figure and campaigner, and he's also a trustee and an ambassador for us here at Kidscape. And finally, we've got Lynn McCann, who is an autism teacher, trainer, author, and consultant. She's also the founder of Reachout ASC, which is Autism Support Consultants. And we've done quite a lot of work with Lynn recently, so you can head to our website and see a lot of our autism resources there. And we might be talking a little bit more about that later on this evening. So without further ado, we can get to the questions. So the first question, I might go to you first, Liat, if that's all right with you, is how can I encourage my child to talk to me about their situation? I know something is wrong, but they won't tell me what it is.
Yeah, well, there's quite a number of reasons why your child may not be opening up, and I think the first one we can look at is that they may just be feeling awkward or embarrassed, even though we know they shouldn't be feeling like that. The second one is they may not want to worry you. They may think you've got things going on in your life yourself, and they just don't want to trouble you. They don't want to kind of add this to your plate. And I think the third area is that they may actually be really, really worried about repercussions, about telling anybody about what's going on with the bullying, and then the bully finding out and things being worse. It's a really common situation. So I think that all of these have a starting point of reassuring your child that whatever is going on in their life, that they can talk to you about it and that you're their sort of safe space. I think that the first step is to find a time and a place where they're going to feel really, really comfortable. And that one great tip for this with teenagers particularly is actually to try and chat to them when you're driving. It sounds really odd, but a lot of teenagers, especially if they're in that category I just mentioned, where they're feeling awkward or a little bit embarrassed about what's going on, they really find it comfortable to talk without eye contact. So that's one idea. Another idea to start the conversation is just going somewhere where there's going to be no distractions, where there's no phones. Really tricky with teenagers, I know, to get them to put their phones down. But it might be as simple as going for a walk with the dog together. If you've got a dog, it might be going to a cafe together, where you're obviously not going to be overheard though, because if they're feeling really awkward, you want to be somewhere there's not like a crowd around the table. And just starting off that conversation and asking open-ended questions about, how are you feeling? I think if you're really, really struggling, think about talking prompts. So is there, if you've got a younger child, is there a book you could read together where a character's being bullied or is having problems like that? You could think about telling a story about a time in your own childhood or your teenage years where you struggled socially as well, and see if they can relate to that. So I've got tons more ideas on that. I don't know whether there's anything specific anyone else wants to add, but it's really about also showing your child you're there for them, you're their safe space, reassuring them, and really, really listening as well. So lots of body language to show that you're listening, away from distractions, and a little bit of reflective listening sometimes can be really good, where you don't say anything initially, but towards, intersperse the conversation with bits where you say, so what I'm hearing is, but you've got to make it sound natural, not like you've suddenly turned from mum or dad into sort of a psychotherapist on the spot, unless you actually are a psychotherapist. Just keep it natural, but try and reflect back what they've told you, and that shows them that you're listening, and it shows them hopefully that you've understood what they're saying. I think finally, that big fear about repercussions is one we should talk about, and providing them the reassurance that you're not going to let that happen. You're not going to let this get back to the bullies without there being steps in place to protect them from repercussions. I don't know whether anyone else has got anything to add on that, because I think it's a really, really key subject about, providing that reassurance from repercussions.
We were talking about this as a team the other day on a call, sort of sharing ideas, and I think one of the things we talked about was, for some children, they might find it's going with how they prefer to communicate as well, and what they feel comfortable with. So we're talking about maybe this idea of some children might want to leave voice notes for you, or communicate on WhatsApp if that's what they're using, or other social channels that they're using, kind of offering that up as an alternative, or even perhaps keep a video diary of things that are happening. So perhaps talking to your children around what are the sorts of things that they'd like to use to talk to you. We were talking about that as a team.
I think another thing is, if they're not going to talk to you, and that's absolutely fine, don't take it personally, especially if they're a teenager. Is there someone else close to them that they will talk to? So, have they got an older cousin who's really sensible they could open up to, or an aunt or an uncle? So that's another avenue. But if you do that, you need to have guidelines, guardrails about who's going to tell the other person what, so if they're speaking to their older cousin, is older cousin going to tell you as their parent everything? They need to agree that between them, really.
Absolutely. But that sounds like really good advice. Sorry,
I was just going to add, I completely agree with Lauren's idea of, it doesn't have to be talking, it doesn't have to be in person. It could be that you agree that they journal, and they'll give you the journal to read now and then. That has to be said openly, though, because obviously if they think they're writing a diary and it's private, that would be a breach of trust. But just finding something they're comfortable with, and really responding to the emotions they're sharing that you think might be blocking them from opening up, whether it's embarrassment or fear.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. I suppose the next question is not so much about the child opening up, but it's more related to school. So at Kidscape, we have a parent advice line, which is for anyone who wants to talk to us and get some friendly, impartial advice about a child in a bullying situation. And something that comes up fairly often, or can be a common concern, is that your child is being bullied at school, and you tried talking to the school, but they're not really responding or taking action. I don't know, I could go to you, Lauren, but it'd be good to hear from others as well, what to do in that situation.
I'm going to nominate Lynn. Go for it.
I was thinking who was going to go first then. I think the information that your child can communicate to you and writing it down, and I think there's so much. I was hoping Lauren was going to go first, because I know there's lots of really good advice on the Kidscape website, but I think it is about thinking about the facts and kind of trying to put your emotions aside, which is really hard as a parent when your child's being harmed and they feel unsafe. But trying to write down facts and having a diary and a log and all those kind of things can just give that evidence to the school. It's really hard, isn't it? Because I work with schools and they're always very kindly just trying to see all the different aspects of what's going on, but they're also quite overwhelmed and quite busy. So it's being persistent, I think, being very objective, trying to present the information and asking them, okay, I'll let you consider this, but can we make a time when we come back and revisit it? And so I'm going to give you this now to look at, you investigate, but let's make a date when we can meet again to discuss what you found out as well as what I found out, that kind of thing. Obviously we work with autistic children, so the communication barriers that they might have is really important to us. So which is why we've been working with you, isn't it, on building communication tools. But again, it's believing the children, isn't it? It's believing them and asking the school to believe that. And again, I don't know how you get somebody to believe something, but it is just presenting evidence and being quite persistent and consistent with, this needs to be sorted out, I would say, really.
And one of the things we do on the bullying log at Kidscape is encourage parents to really be led by impact as well. Talk about what the impact of the situation is on the child. Sometimes there can be arguments kind of over the burden of proof. But if you talk about, your child seems like they've had a behaviour change, they seem very anxious about coming to school, and really focus on saying to the school, we need your support to resolve this situation. We really want to work with you around this. And one of the things we've been recommending recently is to lead with this idea of working with the school to put together a safety plan. So can we put a safety plan in place for my child to help them to feel really safe and supported in school? And sometimes using some of that kind of more softer language around safety and support, rather than necessarily, I think if you go in angry and accusatory, that can end up making things quite challenging. But if you talk about, needing to put a safety plan in place for your child, what can you do together to help keep your child safe? Can be a helpful approach.
Fantastic. I've got a question here, which I might ask you, Jo, if that's all right, which is, how can I help my child if they just seem different to everyone else? And I guess that could mean lots of different things. But yeah, this idea of difference.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, I don't know how that's meant different. I think like we do in the ZAP workshops, and it's really important to tell children, young people, actually different is good, and like we always say, if everyone was the same, the world would be a boring place, wouldn't it? But everyone brings something unique to the table, and it's reaffirming that and that self-worth. And even if it's writing down in the morning, those positive affirmations, 3 things you're good at, and kind of repeating that back and keep that going, because it does get you into a more positive mindset. And not just do that with your child. I think it's really important that parents and carers also do that as well. So it's kind of a two-way task. In terms of being different, again, if it's in school and they're being bullied because they're different, it's something, as it's just been spoken about, finding out kind of the facts, but noting down those impacts, getting a bit more support from the school. I think now it's good to talk in person with the school, but I think it's really good to kind of go into with a 2-pronged approach. So letter, this is how it affects it, just structure it out really well and say, been bullied because, like myself being autistic, I was bullied because of my differences and how that is impacting your child, and try and get someone to work with the child in school, but also see if there's anyone that's witnessed anything in the background. But I'm kind of giving an umbrella because I don't know how it was meant in terms of the differences, but I really do think one of those key approaches is like the positive affirmations, get that ingrained, because I think there's still a lot around in terms of children being scared to be different, it's like following a trend now. Say if you see something on Instagram, you've got to be like that person on Instagram, and social media has this huge effect on children and young people now, where it's like you've got to be the same as this person. You see this person's got these clothes, but you don't have those clothes. So maybe as well just limit kind of screen time. And I think that's important, not just for children and young people, but for us as well as adults. Even me, I'm like, oh, I'm different, I'd love that, look at how that person is. But limiting screen time, it kind of keeps that safety net, so they're not always in front of that screen and doubting who they are and not loving themselves. And I think that's something that we've all got to say to anyone and everyone. It's really important to love ourselves and focus on the good, because all too much we focus on the bad. But it's really important we help children and young people see the good in them, what they're good at, and how it's normal to not be so good at some things, but actually you're really good at this. And that is a huge part of life. And if we can keep that positive affirmation going, it's just such an uplifting thing to do every morning. And I remember a video years ago where there was a dad on social media, and he got his daughter to stand in front of the mirror and sing it back to herself, like, I'm smart, I'm brave, I'm beautiful, I'm funny, I'm caring, and turn it into a little song. And then it was just really uplifting, and it had really helped her out when she was being bullied at school for being different. And I'd strongly recommend it.
I think a really lovely way to help a child in that situation is to try and find other people like them as well. So it could be finding a club where they can pursue an interest that's not something that anyone at school particularly shares. It could be even, I know that we all have concerns about overuse of the internet, but I think one way that it can be really beneficial if used wisely and safely is finding people who share an interest or a trait that's very unusual. So for example, it's, if your child suffers from a rare illness or condition, they're not going to meet anyone in real life perhaps with the same thing, but you could support them and check that they can converse with somebody online who has the same condition safely. Then that could be really, really beneficial to make them feel less alone. So you may feel that you're the only one in your school that has a particular characteristic, but there may be, almost inevitably there'll be someone else out there who's the same as you. And I think that can make a huge difference as well.
I'd also just add on, just to really encourage them to embrace it and show it, like not change. Talk about it openly, because like you've just said, if there's someone else in school that might like the same thing and they feel like they're the only one, opening up, and I guess that breaks down the barrier of masking, which is such a common thing at the moment, and it has been for a long time. But openly talk about it and really encourage them to do that.
Sometimes I think just meeting one person who's the same as you or similar to you can make all the difference.
Sorry. I also think schools have a huge responsibility to celebrate difference and to explore difference. And, they've kind of got so many good resources now to explore that through storybooks, through videos, through famous people who have different conditions, who are a bit different, who celebrate their own kind of uniqueness. I think we've got to really instill that into schools, into like, it's okay to be different, and to actually actively talk about, why are you all following these people on Love Island or whatever? I've never watched it, but I hear too much about it. And I think, why do you want to be like that? What are they getting that you haven't? And it's kind of, how do you compare yourself to others? But I think that should be part of everything that teachers are doing all the time. And I think they could do a lot with that, again, with all the fantastic resources that we've got available these days. Should just be part of that.
Just a couple of PSHE lessons every term, just celebrating difference, it just makes the world so much good, doesn't it? And I think this is something that I've discussed with Lauren before quite a few times. We need to get that into schools, because I think it makes schools more enjoyable, and being able to talk about it in front of your classmates and making that a safe space having everyone talk about why they're different and understanding why someone's different. I know it'd have helped me massively when I was in school, and I still think that is a huge lesson that does need to be put into schools.
I've been fortunate recently to do quite a lot of work with librarians, both school and public librarians, and it's really brought home to me the power of storytelling as well, and the power of our school libraries and our public libraries and all those amazing books and those amazing stories, whether it's fictional characters or real characters. Stories can really bring to life, can't they, individuality and people's quest to find themselves. And alongside that, you know, like Joe said, bringing in people who can tell those stories, having outside speakers coming into school who represent difference within your community. And can really help children see that there is life outside of school and after school. And quite often people go on that journey and find their tribe later and really find themselves later. So encouraging storytelling and amazing books and those speakers that can come in and really encourage children, particularly if they're in the minority within their school community.
Absolutely. It feels like there's something really important there about, at the same time, you know, celebrating uniqueness and difference. And that's the whole point of Odd Socks Day, which we had yesterday. And then also this kind of sense of connection with other people. Yeah, it's really interesting. Got a question here, which is, my teenager, or I suppose it could be a child maybe, is being bullied by former friends or people who were in their friendship group. And they don't want to name names and tell the school about this, but the bullying is impacting them in a really negative way. So as a parent, what should I do about that? Liat, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the key thing here is, you know, not to betray their trust, because then they're going to stop telling you what's going on if you talk about it on their behalf to the school without their sort of permission, unless there's something incredibly unsafe going on. But I think it's about a lot of talking to try and win them over to the idea that actually, you know, whatever the past relationship they had with these former friends, this is wrong, and you know, this shouldn't be happening, and they don't owe them any loyalty. I'm not quite sure what the, you know, the background to the scenario, the situation is, as to, you know, why do they have some hold on your child? I'm not sure why they, you know, it sounds like it's probably just about loyalty to them. But at the end of the day, you know, you can't, I think that you can't go in and go into school without having your child on board for that conversation. And that's the first step. I don't know whether, you know, others have anything to add to that.
There are a few schools, I think, at the moment, I don't know if it's a system which a lot of schools have now, where there can be, if your child doesn't want you to tell the school, there are ways that can be done in a few schools. I can't remember the system name, but they can basically message the school themselves in an informal way, sometimes anonymously, just saying this is happening, not knowing who it's come from. But if they want to name names in that way but remain anonymous, have the situation dealt with like that. So it might be worth kind of finding out the school's policies that they have on it. And I'd say for any situation, if the school aren't dealing with it, if you have gone and spoken to the school, really read the school's bullying policy and how they say that they will deal with that. Because if they go against that, you've got the power of local authorities, or you've got Ofsted, which you can go to, who schools do tend to panic about. If you go, right, I've written a complaint to Ofsted, because everyone knows Ofsted are the schools. Well, when I was in school, it was kind of their worst nightmare. But yeah, see what systems may be in place in school for students to report things anonymously if they do want to name names but want to remain anonymous, because there's nothing that can be said. And if then those people come back and go, why did you tell us? If it's witnessed in school, then hopefully there will be someone around who will hear that, and then that just kind of reaffirms what's going on.
I think that we do a lot of work as well around friendship and understanding friendship, and on our website there's lots of guidance around kind of friendships, friends and frenemies.
Friendship Friday.
start to go wrong. That's why we have Friendship Friday this Friday. That's right, Joe. Because I think those relationships are really challenging, and when friendships fall apart, that's where bullying can set in. But it can be really difficult to talk about what's happening. So I think, mentioning to the school, perhaps do have concerns, but it's not necessarily about individuals, it's about the group, and you're a bit worried about some of the dynamics, and asking people to keep an eye out. I think that's where peer mentors within schools can be really helpful. So perhaps, seeing whether your child can have a chat to another young person in the school to get that advice around those relationships, and encouraging your children. It's really hard, but not to stick to one clique of friends as much as possible from a young age, encouraging your child to have lots of different friends in different groups, because that really can help build that protection rather than clinging to one group. And when that falls apart, things can get really, really challenging. So, really having a good understanding of what true friendship looks like, and then encouraging your child to kind of vary their friendship groups, I think can help build in some protection.
I think also just trying to build some sort of literacy in your emotional literacy in your child about them trying to understand why their former friends are behaving this way. Is it jealousy? Is there something else going on? Just so they can start to understand it. There's never ever an excuse for that kind of behavior, but you can understand the reasons and put it in context. And I think that's quite useful too.
I think that just lastly, there's one thing, and I mean, if you search, you might find some templates on it, but it is one thing that was used in one of my therapy sessions a couple of months ago, but it's a check the facts exercise, and what it will give you is like different emotions and how this situation is making you feel. So if it's around friendships, so this situation's happening, check the facts. So are you wrong for feeling this way? If they are not being a friend, then no. And it's having that on paper and then having all those emotions there to kind of write down. So this is how I felt. And then often when you're getting it out on paper, this is how I feel now. And you kind of rate that emotion 0 to 10, but also it just helps your child to see kind of what I am feeling is correct. However, anyone's feeling is correct. You're feeling that feeling for a reason. And then it's also giving that understanding of which emotions they're feeling at the same time.
I think Joe's right. All the work we do with young people is this visual, we visual mapping, where we map out the situation and we give them a chance. But I think some of the other visual things you've talked about journaling, drawing out the situation, just gives in the child an extra way of processing what's going on. And then as you look at the situation, rather than it just going around your head, you can see it in front of you. You can add little bits of perspective for them on what is it. Oh, well, if they're doing this, is that a good thing? Is it a kind thing? You say, is it good that they make you feel this way? We have children who struggle to connect to their feelings, so they don't know how they're feeling. They just know they're feeling horrible. So we might give them some vocabulary to use to kind of describe that, or a scale maybe. So the communication wise is when that, yes, tell us what's good about your friendships. What makes you feel good when you're with that friendship? Because there's always a balance, isn't there? But I think, I'm a big believer, because I do it all the time, is this, you kind of find somewhere where you can see what you've discussed, and then you can step back a bit and just reflect on it a bit and see where there may be little gaps of misunderstanding or not getting that is cruel to you, that kind of thing. And the loyalty aspect is a huge thing. Why are young people so loyal to one another? And what are the consequences of that? That comes in a lot when children are led into negative behaviours or criminal behaviours even. So, who is their loyalty to, and why is that there, and is that helpful? So, can have all those kind of discussions, I think. But by kind of either, doing it through drawing or comic strips or journaling, just gives that layer of, well, I've got to sort it out in my head before I put it down there, haven't I? So it helps with that processing, I think.
And it's often another way just for parents to maybe break that communication barrier where your child might not want to open up to you. If you're there to do it, you can both do it together. It's you knowing what's going on in a way that your child isn't having to vocalize it as well.
Sounds like really brilliant advice. I know the feeling myself when there's so much going on out here, and just the act of kind of getting it out there and putting it down there is so useful. Lynn, I was gonna come to you with this next question, which kind of reminds me of the question we were talking about earlier about difference and children feeling different. And this is, my autistic child is being bullied, but the school says it's their own fault for being different. What should we do about that?
Oh, I'm sure Jo can connect with this as well, is that this not being believed is really hard for children that I've worked with beforehand, because part of it is that they don't always have the ability to communicate what's going on, and as we've talked about already, but also the differences in the perceptions. There is another thing, though, that there are children who aren't autistic who may be more sneaky and more clever at hiding what they're doing to the child. So, for example, there can be something like sensory bullying, where they really pick on what the sensory triggers are for the child, and it's really funny to watch them, have a meltdown in the class because that disrupts a class. And there are lots of incidences that we hear from our children where these things are happening, but because it's not that obvious, there was just they're only flicking a pen, they're just, it's nothing, but actually that is really intensely irritating and overwhelming for the autistic child. And I think what we need teachers to understand is that for autistic children, they very rarely lie, for a start. They tell the truth of their experience, and so we need to believe them and really investigate what is actually happening. And I think that what you said earlier, the impact on them is the important thing. It doesn't matter if somebody's just flicking a pen. The impact on the autistic child is so huge that actually that needs to stop. It's not an excuse to say it's only this or it's only that. And I think that autism awareness is so important, because the perspective and experience is different. And if we don't understand it, then we can't take children seriously, and it's not fair. It's just not fair.
Yeah, did you say it's the school that says it's the child's fault for being different? Because I'm pretty sure, Lynn might agree, but equality and diversity kind of legislation and policies, if that's what the school's saying, there's probably a lot of action that can be taken, in terms, like I said, local authority, Ofsted, saying that they need more training. If you can find a provider like autism awareness kind of training and how to deal with that sort of stuff, which a lot of schools do implement now, because there are lots of children, young people with autism in schools. I could get very, very angry with this one, relating back to it. But no, I think it's really important, going back to the education and the training. But if the school are saying that, they are breaking policies, but also within their jobs, where schools should be a safe space, that is not making it a safe space. And you are going against legislation guidelines when it comes to equality and diversity. And they're then going into like disableist bullying, which, anti-bullying week, that's another one which isn't as often spoken about, but there's another area which actually go into your local authority, right into your MP, and keeping a log of all these things is absolutely crucial. But as Liat said earlier, looking on social media for success stories, people with autism, that's a really good point. If we look at Elon Musk, world's richest man, or Richard Branson, both with autism, Bill Gates. So it's like being your own superhero and really promoting that sense of self, and use it as your superpower. That's how I see mine now, and it's taken a while, but actually knowing that it's nothing to be ashamed of, and that difference, that uniqueness, that different way of seeing the world is a really good thing. But yeah, really, I don't want to sound too harsh, but there does need to be action taken on schools that do behave this way. And I know there's a lot, because I get a lot of messages about it, but yeah, that's breaking lots of guidelines, legislation, and that's them then leading on to bullying and promoting bullying behaviours as well.
I think been really fortunate to work with Lynn, McCann and Reachout ASC to look at our own practice as a charity around supporting autistic children and their parents and carers. And it has to be a journey and a work in progress. But we would just really urge school staff to get that autism awareness training for all of your team, so that you can really support your young people. And this week we've published a new guide for parents and carers that Lynn's written for us. So do check that out on the website. Is just fabulous, and again, loads of really practical advice around how to support young people. And we do all of our young people a real disservice if we don't around why they shouldn't be using those provoking behaviours towards other people, why that's not okay. And so, we're all on a learning journey with this, but there's so much help out there, like Reachout ASC, that can help fill in the gaps in your knowledge and support your learning around this.
I think that goes for any kind of disability or difference, isn't it? As we keep coming back to this, when some of our autistic children as well have gender identity differences as well, and they're bullied for that. There are people with, who are physically disabled who get bullied for that. And I think it's just got to stop, hasn't it? There's just no excuse for it. It is a protected characteristic. And we talk so much about racism and bullying around that as well. And, if you're maybe Black and disabled and autistic, you've got all those kind of things that people are going to pick on, and it's just not acceptable in this day and age, is it, to have that kind of thing? Sadly, we have a lot of it in the media, which is another bugbear, I'm sure, for everybody. But in schools, we have to be a place where we stand up to a higher a higher principle, really, and just make everybody feel safe. In that way, sad that we're hearing so many stories that they're not, but we have to keep working at it.
Send them on to a ZAP workshop as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And it feels like it leads on to the next question, which is again about bullying in the school setting, and the school not really being able to take action because this time there isn't enough evidence. So the question is, how much and what type of evidence is necessary? For example, does the bullying have to be caught on CCTV, or do we have to have this kind of proof? Lauren, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, again, we see a lot of this on the parent advice line, and appreciate schools are really busy places, aren't they? And teachers are quickly trying to get to what they see as the facts of a situation and how they can apply that to their anti-bullying policy. But again, it keeps coming back to impact. That's what's really important, because no two children will experience this one incident in the same way either, which is important. So what might seem really catastrophic to one young person might just go over another child's head completely, and that's really important. So again, focus on what's the impact been on this child. If this child is becoming depressed and anxious, if they're too scared to come to school, then they need a support package in place to help them work through what's happened. So that's what we would encourage to be really, really led by. It is helpful for schools if you can keep a log of events, of what's happened where and with who. And again, we have that log on the website to support around that. But that's what we would really urge. There won't always be the CCTV footage. There won't always be witnesses. But really believe a young person if they're telling you that something's had an effect on them, and if they're scared to come to school, you need to put that safety plan in place for that young person so that they can feel really safe with their peer group.
Again, I'd just say as well, conflict resolution stuff that has worked quite well in schools in this scenario where the evidence thing comes into play. Yes, there are many times where it's not going to work, but it's sitting the victim and the one who is said to bully that individual, sitting them down in a room in a controlled environment, and it's kind of hearing both sides. So you've got teachers then that are hearing what one is saying, but it's also then kind of, it's like victim impact statements being read out in a court. You've got, the person that's committed the crime, and then you've got the victim and how it's affected them. It's kind of doing that same thing, obviously not in a court setting and that formal, but it is getting someone to understand how their actions are affecting someone else. And it's also the school observing kind of what's going on in that conversation and really being playing an active role in facilitating that safe space to have those conversations, and to make sure that both sides, if one or the other or both are doing something wrong, that they understand kind of what's going on as well. And that is being done in some schools, obviously it was a lot of the time with Senko staff, to make sure, you know, that it is facilitated in an accessible way and there is support there emotionally if things are discussed. But I really think it is a solution, well, not a solution, but it is a big help that I think could be looked at by a lot of schools. But you do have to assess kind of both individuals and see if that situation's going to be right, depending on what's been reported and each specific needs for both individuals.
Just to say, if anyone has joined us late, you can always pop a question in the comments on the Facebook page where this is streaming, if you have anything that you'd like to ask. We'll have maybe a few more questions. Again, there's difference is a big theme today, but maybe Liat got a question here, which is, how can I protect my child from homophobic or transphobic or racist or sexist or ableist comments, any of those things?
Well, I think it goes back to a lot of the themes that we've already talked about, and I would pick out the biggest of all is trying to get the school to help others, assuming it is at school, trying to get the school to help others understand a difference, and that, you know, this is not something that is acceptable behavior towards somebody just because they are different. And so I think that's the first thing. I think that, you know, the second thing is helping your child connect with others who may be in the same situation. And thirdly, you know, just that it is just completely unacceptable, and that, you know, you have to go armed with your, you know, your journal of the incidents, and go with your child and help them get the support to stop this happening. It's you know, it really is just another situation that shouldn't be happening in this day and age. So yeah, you know, action with your child on their specific issues, but also helping the school know that there's not enough education going on around celebrating diversity and support for it.
There's a couple of other questions which are more about mental health, one about children's mental health, and one about actually looking after your own mental health as a parent or carer who's trying to support their child. So maybe if we were to start with the one about supporting your child's mental health, Joe, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think when we talk about mental health, there's such a broad spectrum, so it's hard to kind of talk about each specific thing. But, you know, I think when supporting a child's mental health, it's taking a step back, and you've got to approach it very sensitively, and it's also dependent on what may be going on. So you know, in some cases you might have to get the GP or mental health services involved. You've got crisis intervention services who are there for children, young people, as well as adults. And it's, you know, looking at doing things together again as a parent with children. It's not making it look like it's just the child going through it. Make it as if it's going to help both of us. So let's sit down, do something together. Let's go for a walk. Putting the favorite movie on, sometimes even just simple things like screaming into a pillow is often can be that release, and it can cause a bit of laughter as well. It's hard to without kind of knowing a broad spectrum of what's going on, but I think just being calm, that safe space again, writing it down, so checking the facts, a bit of mindfulness, and labeling those emotions that your child is feeling and you doing that as well. Again, we come back to journaling or drawing or whatever the case may be. It's getting those thoughts out on pen and paper, being able to sit there and go, well, this is how I feel. And then from there, you can kind of make a plan. So today, tomorrow, we're going to do this. This is how I was feeling. But also, if you do journal it down, talk to your child about what the next steps you think may be. And that could be going to talk to the teacher, the counsellor in a school setting or whatever, because there are those things that all schools should now be doing. There's normally that go-to person who, one at least, should have that mental health training. And yeah, just be calm. Normally just it's simple things like listening. And I mean, when we talk about when someone's in crisis, it's as simple as listening, not talking. It's just sitting there, let whatever's on that child's mind, whatever the problem may be, just let them vocalize it without you interjecting. And then talk afterwards, listen to some music, do things together, because I think it's really important, first of all, just to create that safe space. I know I'm waffling on. It's easier when you know kind of specific situations, but in general, I think that's a good starting point for anyone, that's building that trust for both parent and child as well. But there's so many things that obviously can cause mental health crisis, mental illness, mental health problems. And, you know, maybe that's something to do, find the root cause. If it's social media, you don't want to be seen as digging in and getting too involved. You want to give your child that freedom, but sometimes, you know, you do need to know. And if that's simple safeguards through your internet, like if you learn simple IP address tricks where you can actually just see maybe some sites they've been browsing, it won't show you the full extent of what they might be looking at. But if there's certain sites that they've been going on that may be quite alarming, a lot of children have been, you know, the statistics that came out a few months ago, going on looking at suicide, and we've seen those numbers jump since COVID, in both adults and children. But that's a really good tool to have once you learn how to do it. Often now it's a lot simpler than having to go into command prompt on the old Windows systems. But every network provider normally provides an admin key, an IP address to type into your browser, and you can see. So just check that they're not going on any of these harmful sites that may be kind of promoting any harmful behavior. And like I said, if you've got serious concerns for your child, you've got 999 there in cases where it's, you know, if that's needed in an emergency. And there are crisis teams that should be able to help quite swiftly. I say should because it varies for some reason where with whatever area you're in the country. But yeah, there's just a few things. It's easier, like I said, when you know kind of the specific problem that might be going on, but as an umbrella, building that trust and kind of ensuring that safety of your child.
Thanks, Joe. We've had a comment from someone saying from their professional perspective, this advice is really brilliant. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah, of course.
Because I work with a lot of children who have mental health difficulties and crashes, and often because of bullying. And one of the things we try to start with is again, because I'm a very visual person, we work with that, is kind of looking at circles. So the middle of the circle is where you are now and what's going on now and how it's impacting you. But then we try and draw out that into look at what will be in the next circle, certain things that could get better, what would be next, and then what could be beyond that. And actually it's trying to teach the young person that it won't always be like this. you know, that because at the time it seems a very impossible, stuck situation. And there's a lovely piece of work by a lady called Pookie Knight-Smith, who I love dearly, who's also autistic but a really strong mental health practitioner. And she talks about the window of tolerance and how you can kind of work to expand your window of tolerance. At the moment when you're in the you know, your worst state, in a way, you're stuck in this really central circle, and it's really hard to get out. But we look for chinks in that and how we can sort of seep into the next one, and so on. And because it's kind of a visual analogy, we find that, and I love the word hope, and I use it a lot. And I think, you know, let's look for hope wherever we can, and where we can find bits. And it might be outside school to start with, or in your family. And I think just working with children to expand their understanding of it. It's not always going to be like this. There's little bits of hope somewhere that we can go do, because when you're in that state, you don't see that, do you? And it might take time and lots of reinforcement. But I think as parents, and, you know, as a parent, I've been through this. I've got grown-up children now. I've had to do the same with them as well. That, you know, this kind of sense of, yes, this is what I see now, but where are we moving out into these circles, into a better life? I hope. There you go. It's a lovely word, isn't it? And I think
hold on, pain ends.
Yeah.
I think just looking at the angle of how to look after yourself as a parent when you're dealing with this, I'm really big on this area and have a whole chapter on it in one of my books, because I think our whole culture is around the idea that as a parent you have to put your children first, and that's absolutely, you know, that's not something that I'm pulling apart. But to put them first, you have to be in a position to do that. You have to look after your child. You have to be able to do that, and to do that you've got to look after yourself too. So my biggest message around that is, don't feel guilty about taking a little bit of time to look after yourself in this sort of situation, where it is really heartbreaking to have your child being bullied. There's no question about it. And you know, it can be incredibly upsetting, and at the same time you feel like you've got to be there for them when you want to cry. You want to go in the corner and cry too, and you've got to hold it together a lot of the time. So a few things there, you know, look at the classic self-care stuff around, you know, make sure that as much as possible you can get enough sleep, eat well, exercise, you know, have a lovely relaxing bath, or, you know, listen to some nice music, whatever it takes. The little things matter. Try and find someone outside of your child's earshot that you can use as a sort of shoulder to cry on, or for support too, because you need it too in this situation. You know, and just have that scope to kind of have a sounding board and someone you can offload with. But yeah, just don't feel for a second that you should feel guilty about looking after you too.
And I'd just kind of add on to that, there are organisations that will, if you're not getting much luck with local mental health teams or whatever, say like Papyrus do a lot of support for parents, but also Papyrus and Mind, they can also be a fast track way of getting some help. And also the NSPCC can kind of advise on that sort of area as well. And I think it's really important that, you know, these organisations also play a huge role at the moment in the communities with services so stretched that, you know, there are people out there that can help and are there to listen to you too, as well as getting that support for your child, as you've just said.
And I'd also say, you know, celebrate the wins as well. It goes back to what Lynn was saying about the circles. I think with so many parents spending a lot of time on social media as well, everyone else's lives can look really perfect, and it can look like their families are sorted. No one's families are, everyone's got issues and got things that they're struggling with. And so try not to get caught up in that as a parent, and celebrate those little wins every day, because your child will really value that as well. They don't want, you might want to make everything perfect for them, but you can't do that. Life's not perfect, it's messy. And so yes, celebrating those small wins. And Kidscape do run our ZAP workshops every month for children and families impacted by bullying. So do access those workshops and feel some of that community and some of that solidarity and some of that support, so you know you're not on your own.
Absolutely, it's all about that kind of connection again. It's so important. We've got one final question from Catherine, who has asked, what advice would you give to older children or even adults who were impacted by bullying as younger children and who struggle with the effects of this as an adult, i.e. it's not still happening, but they still feel the effects? I suppose I'll just throw that out there to the floor. Does anyone want to answer that?
I'm gonna,
Yeah.
Oh, go for it, Joe.
No, go on, after you.
I was that person. I think many of the Kidscape, the people involved in Kidscape as adults, as ambassadors, were bullied ourselves. And I think the single biggest thing that's made a difference for me was just counselling, frankly. And obviously that's not always available privately, it's not always affordable, but you will find that quite a lot of counsellors can do pro bono, like free sessions or low cost affordable sessions if you explain the background. And I just think that it's so good to offload and unpack what happened and start to understand that it wasn't actually your fault. And that the way teachers and even parents sometimes dealt with bullying a few decades ago was so different to now. The ideas of like sticks and stones won't break your bones, will break your bones, but names will never hurt you, or the idea that it was your fault for some reason, or you should just suck it up. We've got to shed all of those ideas as adults and rethink what happened when we were children.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, I was going to say talk as well. I see it. We all look back at our past and there's always something, and something will always trigger a memory, and we're always processing. And I think it does take time. Even, as you go into the workplace as an adult, you'll have a memory of bullying from childhood in school. But yeah, reaching out to your GP to refer you for some maybe CBT or DBT, whatever it may be, or a lot that's being used now, which is EMDR, which is processing that moment. So you're going back to that specific point and taking your brain back to that moment where you were at, where you felt unsafe or just so small in a situation that you felt insignificant to anyone. And I still go back there, but that EMDR for me, it is tough and it takes a few sessions, but it's a really helpful tool, and it just helps your brain process it over again. And what they often ask is, you don't realize it, I know I didn't, but you go back there and then you're kind of shouting all the things that you wanted to shout. When you look back at situations, you're like, I wish I said that. I wish I'd have stood up for myself in this way, and made myself feel like I was worth something by saying that. And then you can put that into practice, and then that becomes the past, becomes your present, and you've stood up for yourself, and you're kind of tackling that and changing that memory.
It's really, really good advice. I think, I've heard just how powerful EMDR can be in terms of like the brain's processing and stuff. So we haven't got any more questions. So I just really want to thank all of you, really, first of all, for being such an amazing panel. And to signpost anyone who's watching. So Kidscape, as Lauren has said, and lots of you have said, we've got ZAP workshops, which are free workshops for children and also their parents and carers. So you can just go onto our website for that. We've also got a parent advice line, as I said at the beginning, which you can call. And if you want to support Kidscape, I've got a little banner thing at the bottom. You can just text Kidscape to 70490 to donate, and all of that money really goes to help us supporting children and their families who are impacted by bullying. Thank you so much to the panel, and thank you everyone who has joined us this evening. And go well and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.